Let's start with the answers and explanations of the first passage. Let's summarize the passage and move on. So when you summarize a passage, read it quickly and restate the main points. Utilitarianism is one of the most powerful and persuasive approaches to normative ethics in the history of philosophy. Normative means something that sets standards, what is right, what is wrong, what is good. And this is one of the most powerful and persuasive approaches. Though not fully articulated until the 19th century, proto-utilitarian positions can be discerned throughout the history of ethical theory. This started in the 19th century, but the proto-utilitarian, the first of the utilitarian approaches, were there in ethical theory itself. Though there are many varieties of the view discussed, utilitarianism is generally held to be the view that the morally right action is the action that produces the most good. This is the general theory of utilitarianism, that the morally right action is the action that produces the most maximum good. There are many ways to spell out this general claim. That is the most important line of that paragraph. One thing to note is that the theory is a form of consequentialism. The right of action is understood entirely in terms of consequences. So when do you say an action is correct? On the basis of its consequences. And what distinguishes utilitarianism from egoism has to do with the scope of the relevant consequences. When you talk of utilitarianism, it means action. It talks of right action. And what is right action? Action that produces the maximum good. How do you know what is the right action? In terms of the consequence, the amount of good that it creates. And therefore, utilitarianism is slightly different from egoism. In what way? The scope of the relevant, the range of the relevant consequences. On the utilitarian view, one ought to maximize the overall good, that is, consider the good of others as well as one's own good. This is the basics. This is the understanding of, gives you an idea what is utilitarianism. Now we go on to the utilitarians, people who propagated this theory. The classical utilitarians, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, identified the good with pleasure, and so with Epicurus were hedonists. So Bentham and Mill said good means ones that gives pleasure. So in some ways they were like the Epicureans. They were like Epicurus, they were hedonists. A hedonist is one who believes that the purpose of life is the pursuit of pleasure. About value, they also held that we ought to maximize the good, bring about the greatest amount of good for the greatest number. This is what Bentham and Mill said, greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. Utilitarianism is also distinguished by impartiality and agent neutrality. So when he uses terms like this, when any passage uses terms like this, the explanation of that term will be immediately after it. Sometimes it comes before it with the term summing it up. Here it comes after it. So what are those two terms that we need to see? Impartiality and agent neutrality. What is that? Everyone's happiness counts the same. When one maximizes the good, it is the good impartially considered. Clear? What does impartiality and neutrality mean? Everyone is the same, and when you're talking of maximizing the good, you're impartially talking about the good. My good does not counts for no more than anyone else's good. Further, the reason I have to promote the overall good is the same reason anyone else has to promote the good. It is not peculiar to me. Though the first systematic account of utilitarianism was developed by Jeremy Bentham, the core insight motivating the theory occurred much later. So the first concepts of utilitarianism, the father of utilitarianism is Jeremy Bentham. But these concepts had already been expressed much earlier. That insight is that what was expressed earlier? the morally appropriate behavior will not harm others and increase happiness or utility. What is morally appropriate behavior? Something that doesn't harm others, something that increases happiness or utility. What is distinctive about utilitarianism in its approach is taking that insight and developing an account of moral evaluation and moral direction that expands on it. This was earlier there in moral theory, that morally appropriate behavior is something that doesn't harm others, something that increases the pleasure of everyone. But what did utilitarianism do? It took it further, right? It developed it further by developing an account of moral evaluation and the moral direction that this morally appropriate behavior ought to take. Clear? Some of the earliest utilitarian thinkers, so he talked about Jeremy Bentham and how Jeremy Bentham borrowed or developed the ethical theories on what is morally appropriate behavior. Now we're coming to some other parts. Some of the earliest utilitarian thinkers were the theological utilitarians such as Richard Cumberland and John Gray. They believed that promoting human happiness was incumbent on us since it was approved by God. Human beings have to promote happiness. Why? Because God asked it. God approved it. After enumerating the ways in which humans come under obligations, the obligation to be virtuous, the civil obligations arising from authority to God. So human beings come under various obligations. We by very being human, we have certain duties and obligations. And he spelled out the different obligations, obligation to nature, to be virtuous, civil obligations, etc. Then he quotes John Gay. The passage quotes John Gay. From the considerations of these four sorts of obligations, it is evident that a full and complete obligation which will extend to all cases can only be that arising from the authority of God. We have different kinds of obligations, 4 different kinds that have been enumerated in the passage. All these arise from the authority of God. God is the one who created these obligations for people. Because of God only can in all these cases make a man happy and miserable. Therefore, since we are obliged to that conformity called virtue, it is evident that the immediate rule or criterion of it is the will of God. Why should we be good? Why should we be virtuous? Because we have an obligation to be good and virtuous. And why is that? Because that is the will of God. That is what God wants us to do. That is what John Gay says. All right, now this is the penultimate, this is the last concluding paragraph of the passage. Promoting human happiness and one's own coincided, but given, so human happiness and one's individual happiness coincided. They are one and the same. But given God's design, it was not an accidental coincidence. The fact that everyone's happiness is your happiness is willed by God. It didn't happen by accident. This approach to utilitarianism, the theological utilitarianism, the one that said, the one earlier to Bentham and Mill, which was promoted by Cumberland and John Gay, this approach to utilitarianism is not theoretically clean. This is the author's opinion, in the sense that it isn't clear what essential work God does, at least in terms of normative effects. God, as the source of normativity, is compatible with utilitarianism, but utilitarianism doesn't require it. So this theory about God's will, human happiness and universal human happiness coinciding is not very clear. We don't know what is God's role in it, and God's, in terms of normative values. Normative, I told you, means evaluative values, the values that set the standard of what is right, what should be good, what is desirable, right? So he says it's not clear. Therefore, this entire theory is not theoretically clean. Understood? So he started by talking to us about what is utilitarianism, how it has its basis in moral and ethical theory. Jeremy Bentham was the first person who gave the utilitarian theory, but he also borrowed, he only developed the main concepts given in the ethical theory. Then he talks about the second type of utilitarians, which is even earlier to Bentham, and they are the theosophical utilitarians who said that we promote human happiness because it's the will of God. The author says this second theory given by Cumberland and John Gay, and he quotes them, is not very clean. It doesn't really clarify what is the role of God and in terms of normative ethics. Clear? That's the summary of the passage. Question 1. What, according to the author, is the difference between utilitarianism and egoism? The author describes utilitarianism and egoism right in the beginning of the passage. Let's quickly go back to the relevant part of the passage and find out. So in the second paragraph, what does the author say? One thing to note is that the theory is a form of consequentialism. It's based on consequences. The right action is understood entirely in terms of the consequences it produced. So the question is, what is different? What is the distinguishing factor between utilitarianism and egoism? Here's the answer. What distinguishes utilitarianism from egoism has to do with the scope of the relevant consequences. On the utilitarian view, one ought to maximize the overall good. So that means egoism, this maximize the overall good. That means egoism was different in terms of its scope being different, and here you can also infer less, that is maximize, so this can only be less than maximum, right? What, according to the author, is the difference between utilitarianism and egoism? When we refer to the passage, our answer was in terms of the scope of the consequences. Utilitarianism aims at maximizing one's good as well as that of others, while egoism aims at reducing the pain of others. First part is correct, but the second part of this answer, the passage never mentions that egoism is about reducing pain of others. Nothing has been said about egoism actually, apart from the fact that it is different in scope from utilitarianism. So A cannot be the right answer. Utilitarianism aims at maximizing everybody's good. The target population of egoism, on the other hand, is smaller in scope. They differ in scope. Utilitarianism, maximum happiness of the maximum number of people. Automatically you can infer that egoism is smaller in scope, right? So B is my answer. Let's quickly look at C and D. Utilitarianism aims at maximizing one's good as well as that of others. Egoism targets only one's ego. This has not been given in the passage. Egoism aims at maximizing one's well-good. No, it didn't say anything. It didn't say anything about spirituality either. Therefore, my correct answer is B.